Okay, so today we're talking about boundaries, and I think that can mean a lot of different things. So, physical boundaries in terms of where we're going to support our clients, how
Mhm.
far we're going, the geography of the area that we serve. Also, boundaries kind of in the birth space with
Mhm.
you and the other people there. And then also getting into emotional boundaries and what that looks like because the work that we do is just, it can be very heavy.
Yeah. When you are trying to be a professional doula, there's importance of maintaining safety, trust, and respect throughout the whole relationship. And that comes from setting boundaries.
One of the first things I learned early on from you is even boundaries with consultations. So, after having done a few, and of course, this was pre COVID, so all our consultations were still in person. And I had had a handful already, and somebody asked if I could come to their house for the consultation. And it kind of caught me off guard. And I was like, hold on, text Stacey. So let's talk about that. What are your thoughts on, do we go to the client's house, someone we've never met before, to meet them for a consultation?
Today, I would tell you no, absolutely not. But did I do it? I did. And funny enough, I did it with you.
Yeah, you came to my house because, and this was the advice that you gave me, figure out why they want you to come to their
Mhm.
home. For me, I had 3 other young kids. It was hard to find childcare. I wanted to be in a place where I felt comfortable. I wanted my husband there. We did not necessarily want our kids running all over a coffee shop to meet with you. And so I don't even remember if you asked me that, but that was why it made sense for me. And
Mhm.
so I think because you did that with me, I was like, oh, sure, I'll go to anybody's house. I just trust everybody.
But it was also before COVID. And I think COVID opened a door for us to be able to do Zoom, FaceTime, virtual consultations that has changed that dynamic now.
For sure. It definitely normalized that
Yeah.
platform as a way of just meeting
Mhm.
quickly. And I, for one, really appreciate that option now. It is a big time saver. And the consumers also appreciate that, being able to just squeeze it in on their lunch break from their office at work and not necessarily having to go out in the evenings or on the
Mhm.
weekends. So virtual consultations are a great option.
Yeah. And there's importance in the time of a consultation. When you are going somewhere, it's easy to get caught up in conversation. When a consultation is a very brief moment for you to share what the role of a doula is, for them to meet you, for you to interview them as well. It took me a long time to learn this, that consultations are not an hour or not 2 hours long, but 30 minutes.
Yes, that is a challenge for us sometimes as newer doulas because going to the cons, we want to tell them all the things that we can do,
Hmm.
all the reasons they should hire us, when really, just like you said, it should be just a little snapshot, a
Hmm.
brief moment in time that's like, this is what we offer. Here's a little bit about me, share a little bit about yourself. We
Yeah.
determine if we're a good fit. And Zoom and FaceTime, like you said, just really lend themselves nicely to that. It feels like a work meeting,
Hmm.
which essentially it's a professional meeting.
Yeah.
Back to the original question, though, about going into people's homes. So now you would say flat no.
I would say no.
I think with Zoom and FaceTime, that really eliminates the need for that
Hmm.
option. Because if you have a mom on bed rest, for example, or with toddlers, you can arrange that to happen after bedtime or from the comfort of your own home. I think that's a good standard to not need to meet in people's homes
Hmm.
until you have a contract in place.
Yeah. Contracts, I think then we will absolutely talk about in the future, though, are a boundary, and it helps write out your boundaries and helps them know their boundaries. It plays very much into the importance of what that relationship will continue to look like.
So important. What about geography? How has that changed for you over time in terms of how far are you willing to drive to meet with a potential client or to serve a potential client? What did that look like for you in your first 6 months to a year as a doula? And then what does that look like now?
It was a lot of driving, saying yes to anything and everything because I wanted clients so bad. So I didn't start out with the best boundaries. And so I would drive an hour to a client, but way that you're supporting them for, let's say it's a postpartum shift for 4 hours, but now you have an hour on each side of things. There's importance and boundaries to know, like, where is your parameter? And it's not to say that an hour isn't okay, because if you do live outside of the Metroplex, you naturally are going to have a longer drive. But I think there is importance in understanding that you don't have to say yes, because by saying yes, you're taking then time away from other things and you can't get everywhere all the time. So with the placenta encapsulation, we hand delivered them. I drove an hour to hand deliver capsules, which I love that it's so personal, but that took time away from my family. It took time away in between my prenatals and my other appointments with clients.
And there's costs associated with that as well, financial costs with gas and mileage and time taken away from other clients. Not to mention when you live in a metroplex like DFW, you have a client on the Dallas side, client on the Fort Worth side, going from one birth to the next or from one prenatal to the next. You're potentially driving an hour or more between two clients. And depending on where you live and what your life looks like, it may or may not be sustainable. So this is definitely an individual call for people to make. And I know in the beginning, saying yes to everyone, it helps get your name out there. It helps people know who you are. And it helps you as a doula see what different cultures are like in different birth locations so that you can make recommendations for your clients. So there are hospitals now in the southwest corner of Fort Worth that I might not necessarily say yes to anymore, but I have been there a few times. And so I can confidently say, oh, here's what you can expect at this location. Here's a doula in your area that would love to work with you. Yes. Much to be gained by saying yes, but also knowing when to say no.
Yeah. And when to say no for a lot of things, your client load, not just your distance, but also differences. That's a big one of being able to say, let me provide you with referrals of doulas who will serve you great, because that is one of the most important things of a doula is supporting your client best. And sometimes that means finding someone who's going to support them best. And that goes to of like an example of a provider, VBAC tolerant to VBAC supportive. There's a lot of conversation between doulas who only support out of hospital birth versus supporting clients in hospital. If you know you're not going to fully support your client in their decisions, then refer them in the consultation. That's when you're learning their birth preferences. And that's why I say you're interviewing them as a part of the consultation you need to know, are you going to be able to support them best?
Yes, it is a two-way street. And I think so important that you mentioned that, because oftentimes the consultation can feel like just you trying to sell yourself. And in the beginning, we're all eager for clients. You want everyone to like you. You want to work with everybody. You want everyone to have the best birth possible. And how else can they do that without you? And so you really want them to hire you. But over time, through trial and error and also through a little bit of introspection, you can learn what clients you're going to work with best. That can be really liberating and giving you the opportunity to say, you know what, I'm actually not available. So that brings a good point too. How do you then convey that to the client? Let's say you had a consultation on your end, you realized that it's not going to be a good fit, and then they reach back out and they want to move forward with the contract. Where do you go from there?
I would usually let them know that I'm no longer available and I have these wonderful recommendations that I think that they would walk alongside them very well with the birth that they desired, period. Simple.
I love that. And I think saying I'm no longer available is the perfect response, because we're not going to say, oh, I don't like your doctor. I don't like working at your hospital.
Yeah.
We can't say those things.
No.
So having a very professional response, I'm no longer available. Here's someone who will support you greatly, I think is the perfect way to communicate that.
Yeah. All right. Question for you. Facebook. Do you accept friend requests?
I do accept if they initiate. I'm not super active on Facebook or social media in general, but if they've initiated that, I want to honor that. And I think nowadays, I mean, we got on Facebook in college when it was just meant for college people to connect. And you could put on there what kind of relationship you were interested in having with people. It was a little bit of a dating website, a little bit of like a yearbook. And I can't believe how social media has changed our culture. But with sites like LinkedIn and other more professional platforms, Facebook can also be a professional platform. So I pretty much primarily use it for business purposes. And so if a client is reaching out to me on Facebook, I can trust that my content is going to be professional things that I don't mind clients knowing about me. I don't post a ton of pictures of my children. I don't post what I'm doing on a Saturday night. My content is pretty strictly limited to things that are relevant to my work. I accept. I think it's a good way to network. It's a good way to be tagged in posts when other people are looking for a doula and someone I've worked with in the past can tag me or tag our company and say, here's a great recommendation, and I can see it and then I can go on and respond. Personally, I'm definitely okay with accepting client friend requests, although I would never initiate to a client because that feels like too intimate of a line for me to cross. And I don't want them to misinterpret that.
Yeah.
Now we're best friends.
Yeah, because you're not. You are in a professional relationship. And you touched on it, that what you post, everyone has different uses of their social media. And that's what's also great about it, is one person can use it for something so personal where another person can use it for something so professional. The question, would your client see something that would impact that professional relationship? And that's where your line has to be, because politics, we see a lot of posts on politics, and
The posts like that can have an impact on any type of relationship.
because when anyone see that, you're being put in categories. And if you're in this category, you're against me. And if you're against me here, does that mean you're then against me in my birth? Unfortunately, is that if we're not on the same page on one thing,
It leads to a major disconnection in all types of relationships.
so I think that is where, as a doula, my question to you is, what is your content that you are sharing, and will it have an impact on your relationship? And you know what? It's okay if it will. Don't add them. Or things that I have done in the past is waited until after their birth to accept that friend request.
That's good advice.
I know it sounds weird because I think sometimes we think about boundaries for people who have hurt us and then setting the boundaries, but rather we're setting boundaries so that we can maintain a professional role in a relationship. So with that though is navigating emotional boundaries, because there is emotions in birth and
So many emotions.
trauma and the things that have come with prior experiences or what could come.
It's a very vulnerable space for
Mhm.
not just women, but their partners as well. Everybody is super vulnerable in the birth space,
Mhm.
except us. There's no reason we need to be vulnerable in the birth space. It can be a bit of a gray area because the service that the client has hired us to do looks a lot like friendship. And if you think about hundreds of years ago, before the role of the doula was professionalized and made into a service that consumers are paying for, it was close friends of the woman giving birth, or sisters, or her mother and her aunts, people that she trusts, to invite into that intimate space and provide her with emotional support during this very transformational journey. Now, with our culture the way that it is and people living far from family, we provide that service to people where we are that emotional support for them, and we're joining them in this very vulnerable, intimate space. Sometimes it's easy to confuse that for really intimate friendship. And of course, we care about our clients and we are responsive to their needs and sensitive to them. And most of us are that way with our friends too. So it's really important to maintain that boundary of professionalism when walking with them in such a space that can look so much like a really intimate friendship.
Have you ever cried at a birth?
Are you kidding? Oh my gosh, like every time. Less so now, especially if mom and dad are not emotional. I don't want to be the only one in the room crying, so I try to keep it together. But at least the first 10 births, for sure. Anytime I have established an emotional connection with the person, whether it's a repeat client and I walked with them once before, and maybe the first birth didn't go the way that they had planned, and then the second one is really redemptive, or when you're invited to support a friend or a relative, which that'll be a whole other topic we should touch on. But yes, I think it's totally normal. And I think what makes us great doulas is that we bear witness to this really incredible moment. How can you not be emotionally moved by that?
Yeah. But I don't think being emotionally moved means you're reducing a boundary, you know, like wanting other doulas to hear that of, you have permission to feel emotions because you are still human, right? Like I've gotten teary-eyed, I have gotten emotional when I see such redemptive births, but there's still a line with it. And it goes to then the other side of that, when we see those really hard moments when our clients are emotionally disturbed, our clients are processing, and they look at us and they say, what would you do?
Yeah, that's a hard one. To speak to your point, totally appropriate to be emotional with your clients in a sense of happy tears. We need to be really careful in the moments where our clients are upset. We should not be crying with them. We need to be a safe space for them to unload those emotions without putting the way we feel in there as well. So when births don't go as planned and they're upset, or when we witness a birth trauma and mom may or may not have perceived it the same way that we have, we need to be really careful with our emotions. They don't belong in that space. That's where having a mentor, a close friend, your spouse, counselor, therapist, there's so many options, not the client, absolutely not the place for you to process.
Yeah.
It's a good point. Do you know what I thought of when you asked if I've ever cried at a birth?
Oh my gosh.
Can we talk about that?
Sure.
So when Stacey was welcoming her second child and we didn't know the gender, and I was only in the room for a very short time. There was lots going on. Things were progressing quickly. It was also COVID. There were a little bit of delays. It's probably the biggest parking garage I've ever been in. It's a super busy hospital. So by the time I finally get in, they're actually leaving to go back for a C-section, and it was semi-urgent. And so I didn't have much time at all to be with Stacey. And they left, and I held it together until they were out of the room. And then this is a good example of not processing with your clients in the moment any negative emotions. So as soon as they were gone, I burst into tears. I'm sitting there crying. My dearest doula friend has just, her birth plan is not going accordingly, and I'm not there with her, and I was devastated. So I'm sitting in the room crying, and a nurse comes in, and she's like, "Are you okay? We need this room."
Yeah, let's just add, because they were so busy, we got the last room when we got there. So they're like,
Oh,
you
I
need,
don't know if I knew
yeah.
that.
So that's probably why we're like, we need you to go. What are you doing here?
Yeah, so I'm thinking I have a few minutes to
Yeah.
like sit and process how I'm feeling and pray. And all of a sudden this nurse comes in. She's like, "Oh, are you okay? Because we need you to go." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine." And bless this sweet nurse, because as soon as I said, my friend is just going back to the OR, and I thought I would be able to wait here for her to come back. And she said, "Well, I'm probably not supposed to do this, but let me put you in the PACU and you can wait for them there." Praise God. So I get to go in there, and I'm finally done processing. And then you guys come back, and all I can see is the little bow on her head. As soon as I saw her little bow, I started crying. And then we got to process happy emotions together at welcoming her.
Yeah.
So that was
Yeah.
so special.
All right. So another thing that comes up a lot is gifts, accepting gifts, giving gifts. Where would you say you fall, and what do you think is the advice to be given in regards to those?
I think, again, in the beginning, I wanted to give a gift to everybody because thank you for helping me grow my business. And it's just not sustainable. I used to do these little postpartum herbal baths. They're lovely. I had one for me, and I just wanted everyone to experience the greatness that it was. And I spent all this money on Amazon, ordering all the supplies, all this time, putting them together in these cute little packages. And honestly, I don't even know if people use, I mean, not everybody wants the same thing.
Yeah.
And so they accepted it, of course, but how is that furthering our business, or what is the point of that? Essentially, I'm a gift giver by nature. So I think at the conclusion of our relationship, I very much wanted to thank them for our relationship by imparting something. But over time, I quickly realized this is taking time, effort, and money away from me and away from my income. And it doesn't make sense. And you had a great analogy that I think you should share about your accountant.
Yeah. So I think we don't give to everybody for letting us be of service for them. Your CPA doesn't say, "Thanks so much for letting me do your taxes. I appreciate that. Here is this gift for you." No, they're like, "Pay me my money, please. I just worked really hard.
See you next time."
Yeah. See you next time. Like, it's because of that dynamic of being a doula and the intimacy and the vulnerability. It makes it feel like we're in a different relationship than we are. And so I want to gift to you because you did. You just walked through something incredible with them. But I don't see gifts as necessary. If you are doing your job and you are doing it well, that is the best gift that you can give your client. Between us, we are so different, right? Like, I'm a very business strategic, looking at all the things. And so my instinct is, what's the cost and what is the return or benefit to run a business? That gift doesn't guarantee anything more than you being kind. And so not that's what we want to take away, but rather use that to put into your company. Could you use that to do something that enhances the way you support your clients? Could you put that into a training? Could you put that into things that help you grow in supporting your clients?
Very well said. I agree completely on the cost benefit, the way you explained that, in terms of not that we are cold and like not giving a gift, but the gift for your client demonstrates your kindness, which they undoubtedly already are assured of because of the amazing support that you provided. But how does it help enhance your role as a doula, especially for future clients too? And you had said gifts are not necessary. I would even argue that they shouldn't be done from our end, because it further blurs that line between, are we someone they've hired to do a service, or are we their best friend?
Yeah.
And we don't necessarily want to do anything that's going to feed that blurring of the lines.
That's good.
What about gifts from a client? Do you accept those?
Yes. Yeah. I think it's the respectful thing to do. I do think that when someone receives receives a service and them giving a gift for it is different than the professional giving a gift for providing that service.
Totally agree.
So
Do you give your accountant a gift?
give them money.
The best gift of all.
Right? Okay, so something that occurs at birth when the clients are experiencing a change in their birth plan and maintaining that emotional boundary. We touched on this a little bit, but that of what happens when clients ask what we would do. So their birth is occurring, something's changing. How do you respond when clients say, what would you do?
It's so hard. And I think we'll talk about this in another episode, but taking away or stepping outside of our hopes and dreams for their birth, because that's not relevant. What is relevant is their hopes and dreams for their birth and their decisions. And anytime we start to make recommendations, we take that away from them and it's no longer their birth. We have interrupted that space with telling them what we think they should do. And that is just not appropriate. So, and this question happens a lot because I think they're vulnerable, they're confused, they don't have all the information, they're not in a space where they can wade through the information and make an executive decision. So they need that input. So they look to us, they say, what would you do? What did you do in your birth? That's a whole other discussion. But the best answer is just always turning it back around to them. So when they say, what would you do? I would weigh the pros and cons of the options available to me and make the best choice I could at that time. So here's what your options are. And you can go into it a little bit. I think it depends on the situation. A lot of times, especially if the birth is unmedicated, mom is not in her best thinking brain. She's in her primal brain because she's trying to labor. And so really she just wants someone to make the decision for her. This is where the role of the birth partner can be really helpful too.
Yeah. I think that there's an importance of having these conversations prenatally.
Absolutely.
Not that we need to know the answers, but when you have spent the time listening to your client, maybe reflectively what they need to hear to help them make that decision. And not saying, oh, in your prenatal, you said this, so therefore you need to continue with that, but rather here's your options. I always mention in the prenatal, it's not uncommon if something comes up to say, hey, can we have some time to talk about this? So I put that thought in their mind already. That way they're not feeling the rush of making an instant decision. Also, it's so uncomfortable when a client looks at you and the provider's standing there and they're like, what would you do? And you're like, oh, no. Sorry, this isn't how this works. But, right. So saying, oh, do you have questions that you want to ask? Do you want to take some time and process that? So that way that doesn't catch them off guard, or they can create that space to process. And then when the room is now just the mom, the birth partner, you can say, okay, what questions do you have? Let's have honest conversations. Let's talk about the pros and cons. When they ask that, to say, this is your birth. What do you envision? You don't have to answer the question. You could just put it back. Obviously, of course, we always want to go over the pros and cons, but help them to zone in on how they're feeling. Because sometimes, let's say it's, okay, they've been laboring for a really long time. There hasn't been progress. The conversation for C-section has come up and they really just want the space to give themselves permission to say yes to the C-section.
Or the epidural or any other intervention.
Yeah. And so I think like that, by doing that, you're allowing them, and you have already profoundly set that emotional boundary to not step over the line and tell your client what they should do. It's so easy to miss that because it almost happens so quickly.
Actually, talking about this reminds me of the analogy we often refer to as the role and service of a doula.
The role of the birth doula is very different than the role of the birth partner. So if we're looking at a wedding, for example, the bride invites her best friend to be her maid of honor and be her person for the day, her support person. She's got her back. She's helping her make decisions. She's helping make sure she doesn't lose her mind, and she's with her through the thick and thin. So that is analogous to the role of the birth partner, whether it's dad, boyfriend, sometimes it's a sister or mom. That is their maid of honor, so to speak, for the birth of their child. Our role is not the maid of honor. Our role is the wedding planner. We are in charge of making sure that the day goes smoothly. When things go awry, kind of checking back in with the mom and, hey, this is happening. How do you feel about it? Or there's been a slight change of plans. You know, the caterer is not going to arrive on time, or the flowers are pink and you wanted red, but we're going to roll with it. And here's what we can do now. Yeah. So this is the change. Here's how we're going to process it. I need you to make an executive decision. Okay, great. I'm going to go continue making sure the rest of the things unfold as they should. And so the wedding planner is kind of the expert on what
Mhm.
things look like. Oh, I've worked at this venue before. Here's how they like to do things. Or your DJ tends to do X, Y, and Z. And you can choose to do that, before or after. So the wedding planner is the professional and just the running of the ship. And not to say that we're running the birth, but we have experience in that space and we are accustomed to how things go, what to expect when plans change,
Mhm.
and we can help convey that to them while not taking it all away from the role of the maid of honor or the bride. It's not our day, it's their day.
When a wedding planner steps in, she's supporting the whole unit because the maid of honor, the birth partner, still needs support too. The maid of honor knows that person best, but they too are walking the experience with them.
And your first birth only happens once. Your wedding, ideally, only happens once. And you may have other kids and you may have other weddings, but
Mhm.
at any rate, the wedding planner will have done this a lot more times than you have and can help shed insight into some of the things that are going on in the day, the options that are available, and how to make things run smoothly.
Yeah, because our role isn't just that physical support. It's not just hip squeezes. And sometimes that is overshadowed, but we emphasize so much on physical support that we then reduce the importance of informational and emotional support. And I would say more times than not, that's been the biggest percentage of support in births versus physical support.
So true. I think our culture plays into that too, because there's still this stigma that doulas are only for unmedicated birth.
Mhm.
And so the culture sees us as someone there to provide physical support to get through the
Mhm.
marathon that is birth, when we know that it's so much more than that.